Jake Morrison stood at the front window of his massive spaceship and watched Earth grow bigger in the distance. The blue and green planet looked exactly like the old pictures his grandfather had shown him when he was a boy. 3,000 years had passed since humans lived on that world. 3,000 years since the alien race called the Kethrathi had attacked Earth with their giant war fleets and forced every human to run away into space or die fighting. Jake remembered the stories. His family had told him about that terrible day. The Kethrathi had come from somewhere deep in space with ships bigger than cities. They had weapons that could destroy entire mountains with one shot. The human military had fought as hard as they could, but Earth's defenses were not strong enough. Millions of people died in the first week of fighting. The survivors had no choice but to escape in whatever ships they could find and fly away to distant planets where they could hide and rebuild their lives. Lisa Rodriguez walked up beside Jake and handed him a data pad with information about Earth's current defenses. She had been his second-in-command for 15 years and was one of the smartest military officers in the human fleet. The pad showed pictures taken by their spy drones of the planet below. The Kethrathi had built huge cities. Where human cities used to be, they had covered the planet with shield generators and weapon platforms that could shoot down any ship trying to land. Nathan Gray joined them at the window. He was the fleet's head scientist and had spent his whole life working on new technologies that could help humans fight back against their enemies. Nathan had discovered how to bend space and time using quantum energy fields. His inventions had made their ships faster and stronger than anything the Kethrathi had ever seen. He smiled as he looked at Earth and said that soon their homeworld would belong to humans again. Admiral Kate Sullivan's voice came through the ship's communication system. She was the commander of the entire human fleet and had planned this mission for 20 years. Her fleet had 200 ships filled with the best soldiers and the most advanced weapons that human science could create. Each ship was built using metals and energy sources that the Kethrathi did not know existed. The humans had learned many things during their long exile in space. Alex Carter and Maria Santos were getting ready for their secret mission to the planet's surface. They were part of a special team trained to sneak past enemy defenses and gather information. Their job was to find out how many Kethrathi soldiers were on Earth and where their most important buildings were located. They also hoped to discover if any humans were still alive on the planet after all these years. Jake thought about his great-grandmother Elena, who had died before he was born. She had been one of the survivors who escaped from Earth during the invasion. Elena had spent her whole life telling stories about the beautiful forests and oceans of their home world. She had made Jake's family promise that someday they would return and take back what belonged to them. That promise had been passed down through 3 generations of his family. The Kethrathi had made a big mistake when they drove humans away from Earth. They thought humans were weak and would never be able to fight back. They did not understand that humans were very good at surviving in difficult situations. While the aliens had stayed on Earth and grown comfortable with their easy life, humans had been exploring dangerous parts of space and learning how to build better weapons and ships. Ryan Phillips was the leader of the ground team that would go to Earth first. He had studied every map and picture of the planet that their spies had been able to gather. Phillips knew that the Kethrathi had built their cities on top of the ruins of human cities, but they had not bothered to destroy everything underground. The old subway tunnels and basement areas might still be there, and could be used to move around without being seen. Dr. Gray had created special suits that would make the human soldiers invisible to Kethrathi sensors. The suits used the same quantum technology that powered their ships. When a soldier put on one of these suits, they could walk right past alien guards without being detected. The suits also had built-in weapons that could cut through the strongest, alien armor. Jake looked at the planet one more time and felt anger burning in his chest. The Katharathi had stolen his people's home and killed millions of innocent humans. They had forced children to grow up in spaceships instead of playing in parks and swimming in oceans. They had destroyed libraries and museums that contained thousands of years of human history and culture. But now, the time for revenge had finally arrived. The human fleet moved closer to Earth like a pack of hungry wolves approaching their prey. Soon the Katharathi would learn that humans were not the weak creatures they remembered. They would discover that 3,000 years of anger and determination had turned humanity into the most dangerous force in the galaxy. Ryan Phillips crawled through the dark tunnel underneath what used to be New York City. His team of 6 soldiers followed behind him in complete silence. They had been moving through these forgotten passages for 3 hours without seeing a single Katharathi patrol. The aliens had built their shiny towers and palaces above ground, but they had ignored the maze of old human tunnels that ran beneath their feet. Sam Baker carried enough explosives to blow up a small building. He was the team's demolitions expert and had been dreaming of this mission since he was old enough to understand what the Katharathi had done to his people. Amy Foster monitored their communication equipment and kept track of alien radio signals from above. She could hear Katharathi soldiers talking to each other in their strange, clicking language, but none of them seemed worried about any threats. The tunnel they were moving through had once been part of the subway system that carried millions of humans to work every day. Now it was filled with dust and broken concrete. Strange alien plants had grown through cracks in the walls. The air smelled like sulfur and decay. Phillips used his night vision goggles to navigate around piles of rubble and pools of stagnant water. They reached a junction where 4 tunnels met, and Phillips held up his hand to signal for everyone to stop. His motion detector was picking up movement somewhere ahead of them. The team raised their weapons and prepared for a fight. But instead of Katharathi soldiers, 3 humans appeared from the shadows. They were wearing torn clothes and looked like they had not eaten a good meal in weeks. The oldest human was a woman with gray hair and suspicious eyes. She stepped forward and spoke in a whisper. She said her name was Elena Martinez, and that she was the leader of a group of humans who had been hiding on Earth for their entire lives. Phillips could not believe what he was hearing. After 3,000 years, there were still humans living on their home planet. Elena explained that when the Katharathi invaded Earth, some humans had managed to hide in deep underground shelters. These shelters had been built during an ancient war and were so well hidden that the aliens never found them. The survivors had children, and their children had children. Now there were almost 10,000 humans living in secret communities beneath the major cities. Sophie Turner was Elena's granddaughter and served as a scout for the resistance movement. She was young and brave and knew every tunnel and hiding place for hundreds of miles. Sophie told Phillips that the Katharathi had grown lazy over the centuries. They rarely sent patrols into the underground areas, and their guards often fell, asleep at their posts. The resistance fighters had been sabotaging alien equipment for generations. They cut power cables and poisoned water supplies. They stole weapons and gathered information about Katharathi military plans. But they had never been strong enough to launch a real attack against their oppressors. Elena's eyes filled with tears when Phillips told her that the human fleet had returned to take back Earth. Phillips activated his quantum communicator and sent a message to Commander Morrison on the fleet. The news that humans had survived on Earth spread through the ships like wildfire. Every soldier and officer felt new hope and determination. They were not just fighting to reclaim an empty planet. They were fighting to rescue their brothers and sisters who had never given up. Derek Stone was the fleet's computer specialist, and he had been working on a secret project for 5 years. He had created a virus that could attack Kethrathi computer systems through their quantum communication networks. The aliens thought their systems were impossible to hack because they used quantum entanglement technology. But Derek had figured out how to use that same technology against them. Sophie led Phillips and his team to a hidden chamber where the Resistance had built a powerful radio transmitter. The equipment was old and crude compared to what the fleet had, but it was strong enough to reach the Kethrathi orbital stations. Phillips connected Derek's virus to the transmitter and uploaded it into the alien communication grid. Within minutes, the virus began spreading through every Kethrathi computer system on Earth and in orbit around the planet. Defense platforms started shutting down one by one. Communication between alien military units was cut off. Weapon systems turned offline. Without warning, the Kethrathi commanders had no idea what was happening to their technology. Elena showed Phillips maps that the Resistance had drawn of every major Kethrathi installation on Earth. She pointed out which buildings contained their most important leaders and where they kept their strongest weapons. The Resistance had been gathering this information for 3,000 years and passing it down from parent to child. Every detail had been carefully recorded and verified. Colonel Ben Adams received Phillips's intelligence report on his command ship and immediately began updating the fleet's attack plans. The human military had spent decades preparing for this assault, but they had not expected to have allies already on the planet. With the Resistance's help, they could strike at targets that would cause maximum damage to the alien occupation forces. Phillips looked at Elena and Sophie and felt proud to be human. These people had endured 3 millennia of oppression and hardship, but they had never stopped believing that their people would return. They had kept the dream of freedom alive in the darkest places of their conquered world. Soon that dream would become reality and Earth would belong to humans once again. Derek Stone watched his computer screens as the virus spread through the Kethrathi networks like a disease. Every few seconds, another alien defense platform went dark on his display. The quantum virus was working even better than he had hoped. The Kethrathi had built their entire military system around quantum communication technology, and now that same technology was destroying them from the inside. Admiral Sullivan stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the orbital defenses around Earth begin to fail. Massive weapon platforms that had protected the planet for 3,000 years were now turning their guns on each other. The virus was making the alien computers think that friendly stations were actually enemy targets. Within 1 hour, half of the Kethrathi orbital fleet had destroyed itself. General Frank Harrison commanded the human attack force as it broke through the confused alien defenses. His ships moved like hunting wolves through the gaps in the orbital grid. The Kethrathi had never seen ships that could phase shift through solid matter using quantum field manipulation. Human vessels appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking at enemy targets before vanishing into another dimension. War Chief Veld Tarn was the supreme commander of all Kethrathi forces on Earth. He had held this position for over 400 years and had never faced a serious threat to his authority. When his communication officers told him that their defense network was under attack, he thought they were talking about a small raid by pirates or rebels. He could not believe that the extinct human race had somehow returned. Captain Lisa Rodriguez led a squadron of stealth fighters through the atmosphere toward the surface of Earth. Her ships were invisible to Kethrathi sensors and moved without making any sound. The alien air defense systems could not detect them or target them with weapons. Rodriguez felt her heart beating fast as she looked down at the world where her ancestors had been born. On the surface, Sophie Turner and her resistance fighters emerged from their hidden tunnels and bunkers. They had been waiting for this moment, their entire lives. Sophie activated an old emergency broadcast system and sent a message to every communication device on the planet. Her voice was clear and strong as she spoke words that no Kethrathi had ever expected to hear again. Humans have returned to reclaim our home. The psychological impact of Sophie's broadcast was immediate and devastating. Kethrathi soldiers who had never seen a live human before were suddenly afraid that the legendary warriors from the ancient stories were real. Many alien units abandoned their posts and fled to fortified positions. Others refused to believe the reports and continued fighting even as human ships appeared in the sky above them. Dr. Nathan Gray's quantum manipulation technology gave the human forces an enormous advantage. In the early battles, ships could pass through solid walls and appear inside enemy bases without warning. Soldiers wearing quantum phase suits walked through locked doors and attacked alien commanders in their own headquarters. The Kethrathi had no defense against enemies who could ignore the laws of physics. Sergeant Major Paul King led a team of Marines in a raid on the main Kethrathi command center in what used to be Washington, D.C. His soldiers materialized inside the heavily defended building and quickly overwhelmed the surprised guards. King's team captured important computer files and prisoner interrogation data before disappearing back into quantum phase space. The Kethrathi military tried to adapt to the human tactics, but their technology was 3,000 years behind the attacking forces. Their weapons could not hit targets that existed in multiple dimensions at the same time. Their armor could not stop bullets that phased through solid matter and then became solid again inside their bodies. Every battle became a massacre. Elena Martinez and the underground resistance coordinated their attacks with the fleet using quantum communicators that Derek Stone had sent down to them. Resistance fighters destroyed power plants and communication towers throughout the major cities. They attacked alien supply convoys and freed human prisoners from Kethrathi labor camps. After centuries of hiding in the shadows, they were finally able to fight back against their oppressors. War Chief Veltarn realized that his forces were facing total defeat unless he took drastic action. He ordered the activation of Earth's planetary bombardment system. This weapon had been designed to destroy the entire surface of the planet rather than allow it to fall into enemy hands. Veltarn would rather rule over a dead world than lose control to the returning humans. The bombardment satellites began charging their weapons and preparing to fire on every major population center. Each satellite carried enough firepower to turn a large city into molten glass. Veltarn gave his forces 1 hour to evacuate to underground shelters before the bombardment began. He believed that humans would never risk destroying their precious home world to win a military victory. But Admiral Sullivan had anticipated this exact scenario. Human intelligence had known about the bombardment system for decades and had developed specific countermeasures. As the Kethrathi satellites prepared to fire, human ships equipped with quantum absorption shields moved into position around the planet. The bombardment began at exactly noon Earth time. Beams of pure energy lanced down from orbit toward the surface. But instead of destroying cities and forests, the energy was absorbed by the human shields and redirected back toward the Kethrathi installations that had fired it. The alien weapon system became a tool for their own destruction. Captain Steve Walsh commanded one of the shield ships and watched as redirected energy beams destroyed Kethrathi military bases across the continent. The aliens had tried to commit genocide against the human survivors and had ended up wiping out their own forces instead. Walsh smiled grimly as he realized that the tide of battle had turned completely in humanity's favor. Captain Lisa Rodriguez crouched behind a pile of rubble as Kethrathi laser fire burned the air above her head. She and her strike team had been fighting their way through the streets of what used to be Geneva for 6 hours. The alien government complex was only 3 blocks away, but those blocks were defended by the most elite Kethrathi warriors on the planet. Tony Lewis carried his engineering equipment in a heavy backpack as he followed Rodriguez through the ruins of human buildings. His job was to break through the quantum barriers that protected the alien leaders. The Kethrathi had surrounded their headquarters with energy fields that could stop any normal weapon or explosive. But Tony's tools used the same quantum technology that powered the human fleet. Rachel White was the team's medic and had already treated 5 wounded soldiers during the assault. She moved from cover to cover with her medical supplies, keeping the team alive as they advanced toward their target. The Kethrathi were fighting with desperate fury, because they knew that capture meant facing trial for 3,000 years of war crimes. War Chief Veltarn had retreated to his command bunker, deep beneath the government complex. He could hear the sounds of battle getting closer as human forces destroyed one defensive line after another. His remaining troops were brave, but they were fighting against enemies who seemed to be made of shadow and lightning. Veltarn had lived for over 600 years, but he had never faced warriors like these. The space battle above Earth had become a nightmare for the Kethrathi fleet. Admiral Sullivan's ships could appear in multiple locations at the same time using quantum field generators. When alien gunners fired at a human ship, they might hit one of several quantum echoes instead of the real target. Captain Steve Walsh and Commander Dana Clark led their squadrons in attacks that seemed to come from impossible angles. The Kethrathi battle fleet had been designed to fight conventional enemies using traditional tactics. Their massive dreadnoughts carried weapons that could destroy planets, but those weapons were useless against targets that existed in parallel dimensions. Human fighters phased through the hulls of alien capital ships and attacked their reactors from the inside. Sophie Turner led a group of resistance fighters in an assault on the main communication center in New York. The building had been constructed on the ruins of the old United Nations headquarters where human leaders had once met to discuss peace. Now it was a symbol of alien oppression that needed to be destroyed. Sophie and her team planted explosives throughout the structure. Elena Martinez coordinated resistance activities across the planet using the quantum communication network that Derek Stone had established. Every major city had cells of human fighters who were attacking alien installations and freeing prisoners from labor camps. The underground communities that had hidden for 3 millennia were finally emerging into the light. Master Sergeant Carl Davis led his platoon in a flanking attack around the government complex while Rodriguez's team approached from the front. Davis was a veteran of dozens of battles in the Outer Rim colonies and knew how to fight in urban environments. His soldiers used quantum phase technology to move through solid walls and surprise alien defenders. The Kethrathi governor of Earth was a creature named Zekmoth who had ruled the planet for over 800 years. He had grown wealthy and comfortable by exploiting human labor and stripping Earth's resources to send back to the Kethrathi homeworlds. When his guards told him that human soldiers were inside the building, he refused to believe them. Rodriguez and her team reached the quantum barriers around the government center, and Tony Lewis began setting up his equipment. The barriers looked like walls of blue fire that stretched from the ground to the sky. Any conventional weapon that touched them would be disintegrated instantly. But Tony's quantum resonators could create harmonic frequencies that would make the barriers collapse. Janet Hill was the team's intelligence officer and had studied Kethrathi technology for 15 years. She helped Tony calculate the exact frequencies needed to bring down each barrier. The math was incredibly complex, but Janet had memorized every detail of alien defense systems. Her knowledge would make the difference between success and failure. Tutter. First barrier fell with a sound like breaking glass. Rodriguez led her team through the gap before the aliens could restore their defenses. They fought their way up the stairs of the government building, leaving a trail of defeated guards behind them. The Kethrathi were brave fighters, but their weapons and armor were no match for human quantum technology. War Chief Veltarn made a desperate decision to activate the building's self-destruct system rather than allow himself to be captured alive. He believed that dying in battle was better than facing human justice for his crimes. But his own officers stopped him because they knew that surrender might be their only chance to survive. Rodriguez kicked down the door to the governor's office and found Zekamoth cowering behind his desk. The alien was larger than a human and had 4 arms ending in sharp claws, but he was shaking with fear. Rodriguez had dreamed of this moment since she was a child, listening to stories about the invasion. She pointed her weapon at the creature who had enslaved her people. The capture of the planetary governor sent shock waves through the remaining Kethrathi forces. Their supreme leader had been taken prisoner by the same humans they had thought were extinct. Many alien units surrendered immediately rather than continue fighting. Others tried to escape the planet in whatever ships they could find. Admiral Sullivan received the news of the governor's capture on her flagship and felt a mixture of joy and sadness. The humans had achieved a victory that their ancestors could only dream of, but the cost had been enormous. Thousands of brave soldiers had died to make this moment possible. The war was far from over, but the most important battle had been won. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the Kethrathi stronghold built into the side of Mount Everest. The aliens had chosen Earth's highest peak as the location for their final fortress, because they believed no enemy could reach them there. The mountain had been carved into a massive military base with weapons that could destroy entire fleets. But the Kethrathi had not counted on human determination and quantum technology. The siege had lasted for 3 weeks. Human forces surrounded the mountain fortress and cut off all supply lines. Admiral Sullivan had offered the defenders a chance to surrender, but the alien commanders inside refused to give up. They knew that capture meant facing trial for crimes against humanity, and many preferred to die fighting rather than accept human justice. Master Sergeant Carl Davis led his assault team up the steep mountain paths under cover of darkness. His soldiers wore quantum phase suits that made them invisible to alien sensors. The climb was dangerous and exhausting, but Davis had trained his men for exactly this type of mission. They carried enough firepower to blast through the fortress walls once they reached the top. Janet Hill had spent days studying the fortress defenses using long-range scanners and spy drones. She had identified weak points in the alien construction and planned the best routes for the assault teams. The Kethrathi had built their stronghold to resist attacks from space, but they had not prepared for enemies who could walk through solid rock. Dr. Nathan Gray had developed a new type of quantum explosive specifically for this mission. The bombs could phase through the fortress walls and then become solid inside the structure. When they exploded, they would create chain reactions that would bring down the entire mountain base. Gray had calculated that 12 bombs placed in the right locations would be enough to destroy the fortress. War Chief Veltarn had been captured during the battle for the government complex, but he had refused to order his remaining forces to surrender. The alien leader sat in his prison cell and watched reports of the siege on a small television screen. He felt proud that his warriors were still fighting, even though defeat was certain. Sophie Turner and Elena Martinez had brought resistance fighters from across the planet to join the final assault. These humans had spent their lives hiding underground, but now they wanted to be part of the battle that would end the occupation forever. Many of them carried weapons that their grandparents had hidden away during the original invasion. The fortress defenders had heavy weapons and strong armor, but they were trapped with no way to escape. Human ships controlled the airspace around. Mount Everest and quantum barriers prevented any alien vessels from reaching the stronghold. The Kethrathi inside knew they were doomed, but their warrior culture demanded that they fight to the death. Morrison activated his quantum communicator and gave the signal for the final assault to begin. Explosions echoed across the mountain as human forces attacked from 12 different directions at once. Quantum phase technology allowed the soldiers to appear inside the fortress walls without warning. The surprised defenders tried to organize resistance, but the attack was too fast and coordinated. Captain Steve Walsh led his squadron in bombing runs against the fortress exterior, while the ground teams fought inside the tunnels and chambers. His ships used quantum bombs that could penetrate any armor and destroy targets that conventional weapons could not reach. Each explosion weakened the fortress structure and made it easier for the assault teams to advance. Tony Lewis and his engineers worked to disable the fortress power systems while the battle raged around them. The Kethrathi had built backup generators deep inside the mountain, but Tony's quantum tools could reach any target no matter how well protected. Without power, the alien weapons and communication systems would be useless. The fighting was intense and brutal as human soldiers cleared the fortress room by room. The Kethrathi defenders fought with claws and energy weapons, but they could not stop enemies who could phase through walls and appear behind them. Carl Davis and his men showed no mercy to aliens who had oppressed their people for 3,000 years. Rachel White treated wounded soldiers in a makeshift medical station outside the fortress. The casualties were heavy on both sides, but the humans had better equipment and superior tactics. She worked without rest to save lives, while the sounds of battle echoed from inside the mountain. Commander Dana Clark received reports from all the assault teams and coordinated their movements using quantum communication links. She could see the entire battle on her command screens and direct reinforcements to areas where they were needed most. The fortress defenses were crumbling under the relentless human attack. After 18 hours of continuous fighting, the last Kethrathi stronghold finally fell. Morrison personally led the team that captured the fortress command center and lowered the alien flag that had flown over Earth for 3 millennia. The symbol of human defeat had been replaced by the banner of their return. The surviving Kethrathi defenders were taken prisoner and prepared for transport to holding facilities. Many of them were wounded, and all of them looked shocked that the legendary human warriors had proven to be real. Some aliens wept openly as they realized that their empire's greatest conquest had been lost forever. Morrison stood on the highest tower of the captured fortress and looked out over the planet that was finally free. In the distance, he could see human ships landing at spaceports to begin the work of rebuilding civilization. Resistance fighters were emerging from their underground hideouts to see sunlight for the first time in their lives. Admiral Sullivan's voice came through the communication system with news that the last Kethrathi forces on Earth had surrendered or been destroyed. The planet was under human control for the first time in 3,000 years. The long war for liberation was over, and the even longer task of healing and reconstruction was about to begin. Admiral Kate Sullivan walked through the halls of the old United Nations building that human engineers had restored to its original glory. The massive structure had been damaged during the Kethrathi invasion 3,000 years ago and then converted into an alien administrative center. Now it would serve as the courthouse where war criminals would face trial for their crimes against humanity. War Chief Veltarn sat in a reinforced cell designed to hold creatures much stronger than humans. His 4 arms were secured with quantum, restraints that would prevent him from breaking free. The alien commander had ruled Earth with absolute power for over 400 years and was responsible for the deaths of millions of humans. His trial would be broadcast across the galaxy as a warning to other species. Dr. Nathan Gray had mixed feelings about the upcoming trials. As a scientist, he believed in justice and accountability, but he also understood that executing the alien leaders would make humans look like the same kind of monsters they had fought against. Gray had spent years studying Kethrathi biology and culture and knew that their society was built around concepts of honor and warrior pride. Governor Zekmoth had been the civilian administrator of Earth during the occupation and had grown wealthy by selling human slaves to other alien worlds. He had lived in luxury while human families starved in labor camps. The evidence against him filled thousands of data files that resistance fighters had gathered over the centuries. Sophie Turner testified before the military tribunal about the conditions that humans had endured under alien rule. She described how her people had been forced to live in tunnels and sewers, while the Kethrathi enjoyed the cities and forests of Earth. Her grandmother Elena sat in the courtroom and wept as Sophie told stories that had been passed down through generations of survivors. Jake Morrison served as one of the judges on the tribunal, along with other senior military officers. They had to decide whether the captured aliens deserved death or imprisonment or some other form of punishment. The decision was complicated by the fact that many humans wanted revenge while others believed that mercy would show the galaxy that humanity had evolved beyond simple hatred. The trials revealed the full scope of Kethrathi cruelty during their occupation of Earth. Documents showed that they had conducted medical experiments on human prisoners and had hunted humans for sport in specially designed game preserves. They had destroyed libraries and museums and had tried to erase every trace of human culture from the planet. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had been assigned to guard the most dangerous prisoners and make sure they could not escape or commit suicide before their trials were completed. She had personal reasons for wanting to see the aliens punished because her great-grandfather had died fighting during the original invasion. But Rodriguez was a professional soldier who followed orders regardless of her personal feelings. Elena Martinez spoke for the resistance fighters who had survived the occupation. She argued that the Kethrathi leaders should face the same fate that they had given to countless humans over the centuries. The aliens had shown no mercy to children or elderly people or anyone else who could not fight back. Elena believed that justice demanded an eye for an eye. Derek Stone had recovered computer files from captured Kethrathi installations that provided evidence of war crimes spanning 3 millennia. The files contained records of mass executions, forced labor operations, and systematic attempts to destroy human culture. Some of the evidence was so disturbing that it could not be shown in open court. The tribunal faced a difficult decision, because there were thousands of alien prisoners in custody ranging from high-ranking commanders to ordinary soldiers. Some had participated in atrocities, while others had simply followed orders from their superiors. The judges had to determine individual guilt and decide appropriate punishments for each case. Ryan Phillips testified about the conditions he had found in human labor camps when his team first landed on Earth. He described seeing families who had been separated for decades and children who had never known freedom. The camps had been designed to break the human spirit and turn people into obedient slaves. Dr. Gray proposed an alternative to mass executions that would demonstrate human mercy while still achieving justice. He suggested that the worst war criminals should be exiled to barren worlds where they could live out their lives in isolation. Lesser offenders could be required to help rebuild the damage they had caused to Earth. War Chief Veltarn refused to cooperate with the trial proceedings and claimed that his actions had been justified acts of war. He argued that humans were an inferior species that had deserved to be conquered and enslaved. His arrogant attitude made it difficult for even the most merciful judges to consider showing him any leniency. Admiral Sullivan announced the tribunal's final decisions in a ceremony attended by representatives from dozens of human colonies. The worst war criminals, including Veltarn and Zekmoth, would be executed by quantum disintegration. Mid-level officers would serve long prison sentences. Lower-ranking soldiers would be given the choice between exile and supervised rehabilitation. The executions were carried out in a simple ceremony without fanfare or celebration. Sullivan wanted to make it clear that humans took no pleasure in killing their enemies, but would not hesitate to punish those who committed crimes against innocent people. The deaths of the alien leaders sent a message throughout the galaxy that humanity would hold all species accountable for their actions. Tony Lewis and his engineering teams began the massive project of dismantling Kethrathi military installations and converting them into facilities that could serve human needs. The aliens had built their structures to last for millennia, but human quantum technology could reshape any material into new forms. The trials had taken 6 months to complete, but they represented an important step in Earth's recovery from 3,000 years of occupation. Justice had been served, and the galaxy had learned that humans were capable of both great mercy and terrible vengeance, depending on how they were treated by others. Elena Martinez stood in Central Park for the first time in her 70-year life and watched human children playing on grass that grew in real sunlight. The park had been converted into a Kethrathi military parade ground during the occupation, but human engineers had restored it to its original beauty. Trees that had been cut down centuries ago were growing again thanks to genetic samples that resistance fighters had preserved in hidden storage facilities. Sophie Turner led a group of former underground dwellers on a tour of the rebuilt New York City. Many of these people had never seen the sky or felt wind on their faces. They moved slowly and carefully, overwhelmed by the open spaces and bright colors of the surface world. Some were afraid to venture far from the tunnel entrances because their entire lives had been spent in dark, confined spaces. Dr. Nathan Gray supervised the terraforming operations that were healing the environmental damage caused by 3,000 years of alien strip mining and industrial pollution. His quantum manipulation technology could restore contaminated soil and purify poisoned water systems in a matter of weeks. The planet that had been slowly dying under Kethrathi rule was coming back to life. Commander Jake Morrison had been appointed as the military governor of Earth during the Reconstruction period. His job was to maintain order and security while civilian authorities organized new governments for the liberated territories. Morrison worked closely with resistance leaders like Elena to make sure that the people who had suffered the most under alien rule had a voice in planning their future. Captain Steve Walsh commanded the space stations that were being built in Earth orbit to serve as defense platforms and trade centers. The new installations used human quantum technology and were far more advanced than anything the Kethrathi had constructed. Walsh wanted to make sure that no alien force would ever again be able to threaten Earth. The reconstruction effort faced many challenges because the planet's infrastructure had been designed to serve alien needs rather than human requirements. Kethrathi buildings were too large and uncomfortable for human occupation. Their transportation systems moved too slowly, and their communication networks used frequencies that hurt human ears. Rachel White had established medical centers in every major city to treat health problems that had developed during the long occupation. Many resistance fighters suffered from malnutrition and diseases caused by living in unsanitary conditions. Some had genetic disorders that resulted from exposure to alien chemicals and radiation. Master Sergeant Carl Davis led security teams that were tracking down hidden Kethrathi weapons caches and making sure that no alien technology could be used against the human population. The aliens had left behind many dangerous devices that could cause massive destruction if they fell into the wrong hands. Davis and his soldiers worked carefully to identify and neutralize these threats. Tony Lewis designed new cities that would be built on sites where Kethrathi installations had been demolished. The new human settlements would use clean energy sources and sustainable building materials. Lewis wanted to create communities that would be beautiful and functional for thousands of years into the future. Admiral Sullivan had to decide what to do with the thousands of Kethrathi civilians who had been living on Earth during the occupation. These aliens had not participated in war crimes, but they had benefited from the suffering of human slaves. Some humans wanted all aliens expelled from the planet, while others believed that peaceful coexistence was possible. Janet Hill conducted interviews with Kethrathi civilians to determine which individuals posed security risks and which ones might be allowed to remain on Earth. Many of the aliens had been born on the planet and considered it their home. They had never known any other world and were afraid of being sent away to strange places. The decision was made to allow peaceful Kethrathi families to stay on Earth if they agreed to live under human law and accept human authority. These aliens would be monitored closely, but would be given the chance to prove that they could be productive members of society. It was a controversial decision that angered many humans who wanted complete revenge. Derek Stone worked to integrate useful Kethrathi technology into human systems while discarding anything that was designed to oppress or control people. Some alien inventions were actually superior to human equivalents and could be modified to serve peaceful purposes. Stone was careful to make sure that no hidden programming could be used against Earth. The agricultural teams, led by scientists like Amy Foster, began the process of restoring Earth's food production systems. The Kethrathi had focused on growing crops that suited their own dietary needs while neglecting plants that humans required for proper nutrition. Foster's teams planted traditional human crops using seeds that had been preserved in resistance hideouts. Ryan Phillips organized training programs to teach former underground dwellers the skills they would need to live and work in the surface world. Many of these people had spent their entire lives performing simple manual labor for alien masters. They needed to learn new trades and professions that would allow them to support themselves in a free society. The reconstruction of Earth's communication networks required replacing all of the Kethrathi equipment with human technology. The alien systems had been designed to monitor and control the population rather than to facilitate free exchange of information. New networks would allow humans to communicate freely without fear of surveillance or censorship. Captain Lisa Rodriguez supervised the construction of monuments and memorials dedicated to the humans who had died during the occupation and the War of Liberation. These structures would ensure that future generations remembered the price of freedom and the courage of those who had fought to reclaim their world. The work of rebuilding Earth would take many years to complete, but the foundation had been laid for a new golden age of human civilization. The planet that had been stolen from humanity 3,000 years ago was finally coming home. 5 years had passed since the liberation of Earth, and Jake Morrison stood in the same spot where he had first looked down at his home world from the bridge of his starship. Now he was on the surface watching children play in parks that had been rebuilt with quantum technology and terraforming science. The blue sky was clear and clean for the first time in 3 millennia, and birds that had been extinct were flying again. Sophie Turner had become the mayor of New Chicago, a city built on the ruins of the old metropolis, using the most advanced human architecture. She had married a former fleet officer named Mike Chen, and they had 3 children who would grow up as free citizens of a liberated world. Sophie often thought about her grandmother, Elena, who had died peacefully 2 years ago after seeing her lifelong dream of human freedom finally come true. Dr. Nathan Gray had established the Earth Restoration Institute, where scientists from across the human colonies worked to heal the environmental damage caused by the occupation. His quantum manipulation technology had restored forests and cleaned oceans, but the most important work was helping the planet's ecosystems return to their natural balance. Gray estimated that full recovery would take another 50 years. Admiral Kate Sullivan had been elected as the first president of the United Earth Government, a position that gave her authority over the planet and its growing space colonies. She had moved the capital to Geneva, where the war crimes trials had been held, and where the new Constitution had been written. Sullivan's administration focused on making sure that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. The Kethrathi, civilians who had been allowed to remain on Earth, were slowly integrating into human society. Many of them worked on reconstruction projects and had proven that peaceful coexistence was possible. Their children attended human schools and played with human kids who seemed to have no difficulty accepting aliens as neighbors and friends. Captain Lisa Rodriguez commanded the Earth Defense Force that protected the planet from any future threats. The new military used quantum technology that was decades ahead of anything possessed by hostile alien species. Rodriguez had helped design orbital platforms that could detect and destroy enemy fleets before they reached the inner solar system. Elena Martinez had lived to see her great-granddaughter born as a free human on a liberated Earth, but had died before the child could walk. Her funeral had been attended by thousands of resistance fighters and fleet veterans who honored her as one of the heroes who had kept hope alive during the darkest period of human history. A statue of Elena now stood in the center of Underground Memorial Park. Derek Stone had developed new quantum communication networks that connected Earth with human colonies across dozens of star systems. The networks were designed to be completely secure and could not be hacked or monitored by hostile forces. Stone's technology allowed the scattered human worlds to function as a unified civilization for the first time in their history. Master Sergeant Carl Davis had retired from active military service and opened a school where he taught young people about the history of the occupation and the War of Liberation. Davis believed it was important for future generations to understand how freedom had been won and how easily it could be lost if people became careless or complacent. The reconstruction of Earth had created millions of jobs for humans and friendly aliens who worked together to build a better world. Ancient cities were restored to their former glory, while new settlements were designed to be sustainable and beautiful. The planet that had been scarred by strip mining and pollution was becoming a garden world again. Tony Lewis had been appointed as the chief architect for the New Earth project and was responsible for designing cities that would house a population expected to reach 5 billion people within a century. His plans included floating cities on the oceans and underground communities that would be connected by quantum transportation systems. Rachel White had established medical schools that trained doctors to treat both humans and friendly alien species. Her research into Kethrathi biology had led to medical breakthroughs that benefited all sentient races. White's work proved that cooperation between species could produce results that neither could achieve alone. Ryan Phillips commanded the elite guard unit that protected government officials and visiting dignitaries. His soldiers were veterans of the Liberation War who had earned the right to serve in the most prestigious military position on Earth. Phillips was proud that his unit included both humans and Kethrathi, who had proven their loyalty to the new government. The memorial gardens where Jake Morrison now walked contained the names of every human who had died during the 3,000-year occupation and the war that had ended it. The gardens were designed to be places of peace and reflection, where visitors could honor the dead while celebrating the freedom that their sacrifice had made possible. Human civilization had not only survived the greatest catastrophe in its history, but had emerged stronger and more advanced than ever before. The exile that was meant to destroy humanity had instead transformed them into the dominant force in the galaxy. Earth was once again the center of human civilization, but now it was also the capital of an interstellar empire. Children who had been born after the Liberation played games that their parents could never have imagined during the dark years of alien rule. They learned about science and art and philosophy in schools that encouraged creativity and independent thinking. These children would grow up to explore new worlds and make discoveries that would advance all of galactic civilization. Morrison smiled as he watched a group of human and Kethrathi children playing together in a garden where alien torture chambers had once stood. The cycle of hatred and revenge had been broken by people who chose mercy over vengeance and cooperation over domination. Earth had been transformed from a symbol of human defeat into a beacon of hope for all species who dreamed of freedom and justice. The story of humanity's return to Earth would be told for thousands of years as an example of what could be achieved through courage, determination, and the refusal to accept defeat. The planet that had been stolen had been reclaimed, and the species that had been scattered across the stars had come home at last.